Today we're going to be going through a PowerPoint presentation on how to calculate target heart rate. You can just use this as a review or a refresher for some of the information that we've gone over previously in class. First, we got to look at what is your heart rate. Your heart rate's the number of times that your heart beats per minute. As you see in some of the pictures we have here, you can find it either on your wrist or on your neck, and you can do this by counting the number of beats you feel per minute. You can also do this by counting the number of beats you feel for 15 seconds and multiply that number times 4, or count the number of beats you feel for 30 seconds and multiply by 2. So our first step in calculating target heart rate is to calculate your max heart rate. Your max heart rate is just a number that helps determine what your target heart rate should be. Our formula for calculating max heart rate is 220 minus your age. And we'll look at a couple examples here of how to calculate your max heart rate. Bill is 20 years old, and so if we use the max heart rate formula of 220 minus your age, it's going to be 220 minus 20, and his max heart rate is going to be 200. If we have Jane, who's 57 years old, we would do 220 minus her age of 57, and that's going to give us 163, which would be her max heart rate. So as you can see, your max heart rate is going to go down the older you get. Next, after calculating our max heart rate, we would then calculate our target heart rate. Your target heart rate is important because it's a zone that tells you what your heart rate should be when you exercise. It's a good indicator of how hard you're working out. So it's not necessarily just how sweaty you are or how tired or out of breath you feel. Your heart rate, and more specifically your target heart rate, is going to be a better indicator of how hard you're working out. So if we do a moderate workout, it would be 50 to 70% of your max heart rate. Vigorous exercise intensity would be 70 to 85% of your max heart rate. And we would calculate that by doing 220 minus your age for max heart rate and then multiply it by the percentage of your desired target heart rate that you choose. So here we have a couple examples. The first one we have is Joe. He's 35 years old, and he wants to get in a pretty vigorous exercise of 80% of his max heart rate. First step is to find his max, which is 220 minus his age, 35, and that's going to give us 185. Then we're going to multiply that max heart rate times his desired target heart rate, which is 80%, and that's going to give us 185 times 80%, which is 148. We'll do one more example here. Sue is 48 years old, and she wants to exercise at 60% of her max heart rate. So again, first we find her max heart rate, 220 minus her age, which is 48, that's going to give us 172. And then she wants to exercise at 60% of her max, so we would take 172, multiply it by 60%, and that's going to give us 103.2. So those are just a couple examples of how we calculate target heart rate, and you can use this just to help refresh on some of the information we previously covered. Lastly, we have just a look at some of our references that we used in making this presentation.